This is Lars Ricken, Borussia Dortmund fan, protege and hero. Once described in Germany as the greatest talent of the last 20 years, injuries prevented Ricken from realising his full potential. Nevertheless, his journey from the Westfalenstadion stands to the pitch would define his club's path from near extinction to European football's summit.
In 1986, Dortmund were at their lowest ever ebb.
Threatened with a points deduction for financial issues, the club were fighting against relegation. Sportingly, despite a brief period of success in the 1960s, Dortmund were hardly giants. Between 1967 and 1987, Dortmund didn't finish higher than 5th in the Bundesliga and slumped to 16th in 1986, leading to a relegation playoff with Fortuna Cologne.
Considering their financial problems, some fans felt Dortmund would never come back if they were relegated.
After losing the first leg 2-0, Dortmund were, with a 9-year-old Ricken in the stands, 1-0 down in the second inside 15 minutes. Recent club CEO Hans-Joachim Watzke, who watched on that day, later described Dortmund as clinically dead at this point. Dortmund fought back, however. After a tense final quarter, Jürgen Wegmann bundled home an aggregate equaliser with the last meaningful kick to save Dortmund's Bundesliga status and possibly their very existence. Ricken told Uli Hesse in Building the Yellow Wall that he'd never heard a louder cheer, while Hesse describes Wegmann's goal as the most important in the club's history. The 3-3 aggregate scoreline resulted in a one-off decider, which Dortmund incredibly won 8-0.
This was the start of Dortmund's rise.
Dortmund finished 4th the following season and would win the German Cup in 1989, their first major trophy in 23 years. The 4-1 cup final win over Werder Bremen showed the mid-90s vintage starting to develop, with midfielders Andreas Möller and local hero Michael Zorc both starting. The club were growing too. Dortmund would sell more than 4 times the league average number of season tickets in 1992, helping to overcome financial issues. Coach Horst Koppel, however, was sacked after finishing just 10th in the 1990-1991 season, which saw a run of 14 games without a win. Ottmar Hitzfeld would be Koppel's replacement after he won the Swiss Cup in 1985 with small club Aarau before winning 4 major trophies with Grasshoppers. A former maths teacher, Hitzfeld described himself as an authoritarian coach who wanted tactical discipline and a fierce winning mentality. Hard-working Swiss striker and fan favourite Stefan Chapuisat was Hitzfeld's first major addition before he promoted 20-year-old goalkeeper and local boy Stefan Kloss to number 1. Dortmund would only narrowly miss out on the title in Hitzfeld's first season.
The resulting UEFA Cup spot, however, would become crucial to Dortmund's progression under Hitzfeld.
The run to the 1993 final made Dortmund 25 million Deutschmarks, thanks to a major TV deal and the early exits of other Bundesliga clubs, which saw Dortmund receive a huge portion of the broadcast revenue. That windfall was already being reinvested. Matthias Sammer, who'd helped Stuttgart win the 1992 title, joined after just 6 months at Inter Milan. Once a striker, Hitzfeld deployed Sammer at sweeper, where he would captain Dortmund and win the 1996 Ballon d'Or. Germany defender Stefan Reuter arrived from Juventus in 1992, before striker Karl-Heinz Riedler arrived from Lazio, while Brazilian international centre-back Julio Cesar arrived in 1994, also from Juventus. The emergence of an 18-year-old Ricken, meanwhile, added to the homegrown core of Zorc and Kloss.
But the return of midfielder Möller was perhaps the most important addition.
A controversial figure, Möller had left Dortmund for boyhood club Eintracht Frankfurt in 1990 before joining Juventus too. After 6 more years at Dortmund, Möller would leave again in 2000, this time for fierce local rivals Schalke. Underrated by modern audiences, the effective but skillful attacking midfielder Möller was capped 85 times by Germany, scoring an impressive 29 goals in that time, and he was part of the victorious 1990 World Cup squad and a leading member of the Euro 96 winning team. Forever the ruthless competitor, in April 1995, Möller was fined 10,000 Deutschmarks, banned for 2 games, and dropped from the national team for what Terry Duffelen in A History in Black and Yellow described as one of the worst dives in German football history to win a penalty against Karlsruhe. Assembling an expensive team, Dortmund's drive was aimed at challenging and outspending a struggling Bayern Munich as the dominant force. Bayern finished just 10th in 1992 and would win just one title between 1990 and 1997.
Hitzfeld and his stacked squad were ready to capitalise.
Although Bayern reclaimed the title in 1994, Dortmund entered the final day in 1995, needing to beat Hamburg to win the league and hope Bayern, who only finished 6th, could take points from Dortmund's title rivals Werder Bremen. First half goals from Möller and Ricken saw Dortmund comfortably beat Hamburg as Bayern saw off Bremen 3-1. Dortmund were German champions by a single point, their first ever Bundesliga title and their first national championship in 32 years. The club's upward trajectory continued, characterised by a policy known as Steine und Beine, or stones and legs, a plan to invest in infrastructure as well as players. Dortmund were the first German club to surpass 50 million Deutschmarks in revenue and buy their stadium from local authorities. Having barely avoided bankruptcy less than a decade earlier, business newspaper Handelsblatt at the time described the club as football's market leaders. On the pitch, meanwhile, having added Germany centre-back Jürgen Kohler from Juventus as well, Dortmund retained the title in 1996 ahead of Bayern, who had fought back and tried to unsettle Dortmund players via a series of transfer bids as the club's rivalry developed.
That summer saw the final additions made to Dortmund's most remembered team.
Graceful Portuguese midfielder Paulo Sousa arrived also from Juventus, but the most unexpected addition was Paul Lambert. Joining from Scottish club Motherwell only as midfield cover, with injuries plaguing the squad, Lambert blossomed in Germany. In awe of the team he'd joined, Hesse recounts seeing Lambert leave training with a club shirt as a souvenir, while he would oogle the expensive watches of his more eminent teammates. Despite his accurate passing and defensive acumen becoming key to the club's successes, Lambert would last just 15 months in Germany before joining Celtic with his wife Monica homesick. Despite their spending, Dortmund's European success was yet to match their domestic triumphs. The 1993 UEFA Cup final saw a 6-1 aggregate rout by Juventus, who would again dispense with Dortmund in the 1995 semi-final 4-3. Dortmund were again drawn with Juve in the 1995-96 Champions League group stage. Dortmund responded to a 3-1 home loss on match day 1 with a 2-1 win in Turin, although by that point Juventus had already won the group. Dortmund were knocked out by holders and eventual finalists Ajax in the quarterfinals.
1997, however, would be Dortmund's year.
Although Dortmund finished behind Atletico Madrid on goal difference in the 96-97 group stages, they would win 4-1 on aggregate in the last 8 over French champions Auxerre, before adding a pair of 1-0 wins over Manchester United to set up a final with who else but Juventus at the Olympiastadion in Munich. The teams, of course, knew each other well. Dortmund starters Möller, Sousa, Kohler and Reuter all joined directly from Juve, while this was the 7th meeting between the teams in 4 years. Dortmund were yet to take a meaningful win and were understandably underdogs again. 6 Juve players would be nominated for that year's Ballon d'Or. Dortmund, however, would be 2-0 up by half-time. Striker Riedler later claimed he dreamt the night before of scoring twice, once with his head and once with his left foot. He did just that. Juve coach Marcello Lippi introduced Alessandro Del Piero at half-time to join Alan Boksic, Zinedine Zidane, who was expertly marshalled by Lambert, and Christian Vieri in attack. Del Piero soon halved the lead.
Having watched his team barely avoid relegation and possible bankruptcy only a decade earlier, the now 20-year-old Ricken's 70th minute introduction would be decisive, however.
Played in by Möller, with his very first touch, Ricken chipped Juve goalkeeper Angelo Peruzzi from 30 yards. Ricken's spectacular goal, however, had been planned. During the first half, Ricken had noticed Peruzzi would stand well out of his goal and told teammate Heiko Herrlich on the bench, "The first thing I'm going to do is hit one at goal, no matter where I am." With Juventus resistance broken, Hitzfeld introduced the now 35-year-old club captain Zorc, who collected the European Cup for his hometown, before 300,000 fans lined their bus parade route the following day. Hitzfeld had taken Dortmund to the summit of German football in only 4 years, and to Europe's just 2 years later.
The final, however, was to be his last game as coach.
Dortmund could only finish third in the league that season, while the club hierarchy were concerned over friction between the players and the coach, while reports of squad cliques were emerging even before the final with Juve. Dortmund defender Knut Reinhardt later reported a class division in the squad. The former Serie A players would speak Italian to each other to annoy the rest. Sammer accused the club physio of incompetence, forcing his resignation, while the captain's relationship with Hitzfeld had also soured. Defelen also suggests that club president Gerd Neinbaum, whose relationship with Hitzfeld was deteriorating too, wanted the club to evolve and regenerate an aging squad. As a result, Hitzfeld was moved to the sporting director role and was replaced by the tellingly Italian former Parma coach Nevio Scala. Scala lasted just one season as Dortmund finished 10th, despite another run to the Champions League last four, beating Bayern in the quarter-finals.
A new off-field crisis was developing too.
Despite another title in 2002 with Sammer as coach, Dortmund's desperate overspending to keep pace with Bayern contributed to a second financial meltdown, which again threatened their existence in 2005. The situation was so dire that Bayern even loaned their rivals €2 million in 2003 to pay staff. By that point, the 1997 team had long fallen apart. By the end of 1998, Lambert, Sousa, Sammer, Kloss, Riedler and Zorc were all gone, while Möller, Cesar and Chaprasat soon followed. Ricken's career was affected by injuries and he never reached his true potential before retiring from senior football in 2007 at just 30. Hitzfeld's promotion to sporting director, however, was perhaps the biggest mistake of all, as he left for Bayern Munich a year later to win 4 Bundesliga titles between 1999 and 2003, as well as 2 German Cups and the Champions League in that time, reasserting Munich dominance. Meanwhile, severely weakened, Dortmund would again drift back towards mid-table until Jurgen Klopp's first title in 2011. Like Ricken, Dortmund's expensively assembled 1997 team's peak was short. Although that Stein und Beine policy actually endangered club infrastructure and saw their best players leave,
fans like Ricken, however, may still argue that in hindsight, their 90s highs were nevertheless worth the risk.